Hello, this video is about the making of and the mechanics of my Phoenix puppet. It's the biggest and most complex puppet that I've ever made, and I'm enormously proud of it. It's taken me years and years to finish, but it's finally done. It started off back in the first lockdown in 2020, and I was working from my bedroom, and this family of magpies used to come visit. And they were so funny and so sweet and so playful, and I used to feed them mealworms, and they used to hop in through my window and just like chirp at each other and play with each other, and it was just amazing to watch. So I thought I'd really like to make a magpie. So I wanted to use the reciprocal motion joints that I'd used in the dragon to make the wings bigger, but make it a feathered bird puppet. I started designing the magpie, and the bowl patterns on the wings are so striking and such a visual treat as you open the wings and these white markings become apparent. But as I was making it, I realised that I wanted something a bit more flamboyant, something that I could use a bit more creative license with rather than going straight realistic magpie. I decided I really liked the idea of having a head crest of some kind, like a cockatoo. They're so expressive, and I really wanted to incorporate that into the design. So I started thinking like some kind of fantasy bird. As we were coming out of lockdown, it made sense that it should be a phoenix, like the symbolism of rising from the ashes and rebirth and regeneration. I just thought a phoenix would be great to share with the world. But as a throwback to the origins, I kept the contrast patches on the wings, but instead of being white against black, I made it a gas flame blue against the normal flame orange. I think this looks quite striking as the wing spreads to reveal them. The feathers are digitally designed and then UV printed on mylar, which is a really thin plastic. This is waterproof and can really easily be laser cut. It doesn't crease easily, but it takes a score really well and stays quite rigid, so it's quite feathery. I explored a few other options like printing on PVC, but PVC can't be laser cut, and cutting it with a vinyl cutter wasn't accurate or neat enough. I also looked at acetate, but acetate seemed to have quite a lot of static between the feathers, and so they didn't open or close really nicely. And polypropylene was just a bit too heavy and too thick. Even the thin stuff was quite clunky. I looked at airbrushing the feathers onto thin card and then using layers of varnish to stiffen that, but I was worried that if I was flying outside and it rained or something, then that could destroy the feathers. But after quite a lot of trial and error, I settled on mylar, which works really well. Something I also really like about mylar is how the light shines through it. It looks really nice as the wing lifts, and you can still see the pattern, but faded like as if it's a real bird feather. And even though mylar's really thin, the central score down the middle keeps it really nice and rigid right the way to the tip. Each feather is reinforced with a polypropylene shaft down the middle, which is counter-scored and counter-folded, so together they form a diamond, which is really strong, and that supports the feather. And then a seam of hot glue just kept that score right to the tip. Each feather is pivoted on the wing bones and then attached to the one before and after. So as the wing opens and closes, it spreads and contracts the feathers evenly. This was a new method that I researched on how bird wings actually work, and they do have these tendons that control the position of the feathers. And this was different to how I've done any wings before, because previously they were just stitched together, so they would open sequentially as the wing spread, which looked fine, but I just wanted that extra level of realism, and like how a wing spreads is so beautiful, and I wanted to capture that as realistically as I could do. They do have the stitches that I've used in my previous feathers, but this is more to maintain the layer order of the feathers and give them a little bit more support, but the majority of the work is done by these tendons. The wing itself is laser cut birch ply, which has been carved afterwards, and I've used 3D printing to create stepped tendons which go up the layers of the wing instead of just across, and these control the motion of the wing much like a folding umbrella does. Something that was really important to me was to make it universal so that anyone could fly the phoenix, because the sparrow and the dragon, they both had very tailored controls that would only really fit my hand or someone with little hands as well. So I wanted to make the phoenix something that anyone could fly. I experimented with quite a lot of different ways of doing the controls and eventually settled on just a big lever, which is something that I'd not really used before. and the wing pulls right in from the tip, so it's a really sharp, nice control. I had previously used it where it relies on the reciprocal joints to pull in, but then despite playing with the mechanics quite a lot, the tip wasn't ever quite snappy enough, quite accurate enough. But this lever pulling right from the end makes the action really nice and definite and defined, and I'm really pleased with it. And also the lever can be pulled in by a combination of fingers. I found on the dragon the repeat action could get really wearing on my forearm, so with the phoenix I wanted it to be a more usable for a longer period of time. And then in future I really like to redo the dragon controls so that the dragons can be flown by anyone as well. So the wings pull in entirely controlled by your hand. There's no elastic to rely on. It's just when you decide that the wings come in that you pull them in. So the other hand lifts up the wing bar, which raises the wings and spreads them at the same time. So combining the movement of the lever and the bar, you could get a really nice realistic flight cycle. The covert feathers are sewn onto a mesh which goes onto a polypropylene layer. I kind of experimented with doing an elastic section between the two bones, but it was just so complicated. It made me really appreciate the complexity of real bird wings, and how those feathers slide over each other is just mind-blowingly beautiful and amazing. And so I've sort of cheated a little bit on that, is that these pieces rotate over each other rather than actually do a stretch. An extra feature that I wasn't 100% sure I was going to be able to get in is these alule feathers, which is like the thumb wings of the bird. They're like little air brakes, and when they're slowing down they just raise up and just create a little extra lift at slow speeds, and they're my favourites. They're so cute, and it's just like little bird thumbs up. So I really wanted to include these, and after a fair amount of trial and error I managed to get them working so that when you twist the wing bar it pulls different parts of the alule, which opens and closes it. Even though it's such a small detail and I don't think most people would notice it, I think for the proper bird nerds it's a real nice feature. The tail is also based on a magpie shape, and it's huge. It's really far too big. I sort of wish that I'd made it a bit smaller, but actually it's such a great feature that I'm glad I have kept it in, even though it makes it difficult to fly. They're much the same as the flight feathers, with a polypropylene shaft and hot glue, but these don't have the tendons connecting them, but they are strung together. So they open and close and create this really nice fan effect. As the tail drops, there are two levers on the outer feathers which push against the butt of the phoenix, and that spreads them and opens the tail. And as the tail lifts, there's a string connecting those two levers, and that pulls together as it lifts, and that closes the tail. The legs can tuck back for when the phoenix is in flight, and also stretch forward for coming into landing. They're controlled by levers which you reach with your thumb, so again that's fairly universal. Push the top levers up to stretch the leg forward, and you push the bottom lever down to tuck the legs up for flight. So this means you can hold your thumb really firm and keep the legs up while you're using the rest of your fingers to pull the wings in and fly. The levers are also split and staggered so that each leg can be controlled individually, which I really like for a little bit of added realism and movement and control. Mechanically it works the same way as bone and tendon again, so like the reciprocal motion, like a folding umbrella. And then the toes are strung over the top and the bottom, working like a real bird's leg. As the leg contracts, it pulls the string from the underside of the foot tight over the ankle bone, and then as the leg extends the opposite happens and it pulls the top string tight and spreads the toes. This is really just copying how real bird feet work, and it means that when it lands it feels like it's really grabbing onto your hand, which is a feature I really like. The body itself is super lightweight. It's really hollow with ribs or struts which are holding a mesh skin over the top of it. It's a structured sort of mesh with multiple layers which has the feathers just stitched onto it. The feathers themselves are synthetic taffeta, so it's got a really nice rigidity and structure to it, but also real silk. When you laser cut it, that frays, but with synthetic it seals the edges, so you don't need to worry about them shredding and becoming messy. They also take airbrush paint really well, so I was able to colour the feathers individually before stitching them on, and then once the full body was complete, then I could do an overall airbrush to blend all of the different tones in together. And this was especially nice on the neck, which I wanted to be a brighter flame, and the airbrushing just blended that all together with the orange body flames. The neck itself is a thin rope with segments along the length of it and feathers stitched onto that and layered up over each other. So there's quite a lot of movement and the feathers flow over each other really nicely. There's a lever that pulls the head in with 2 strings that are attached at the back of the head, and this pulls in and creates a counter movement to the 3 strings that control the axis of the head and the beak and the crest. And the combination of this lever and the other hand controlling the rest of the head gives really nice expressive movement. The head itself is loosely based on a harpy eagle, which I think are just the most beautiful birds. They're so intense looking, but also like a little bit derpy sometimes as well, which I thought was cute. There's a separate string controlling the crest and the beak, so these can be individually manipulated. I was originally going to use boat eyes, because you can get some really nice designed cabochon eyes on the internet, but as there's such a strong feature, I decided that I really wanted to make my own. So these are from photographs that are then digitally altered and then printed out and glued onto the back of glass cabochons. And the beak and the feet are UV gel cure nail varnish, which I'd seen used before in some amazing nail videos, but I've never had my nails done, but I thought it was such a glossy and amazing material to be able to cope with being on the end of someone's hands, with magnetic iridescent and chrome powders included in it, and I think they look really great. I'm really pleased with how that's turned out. Making this phoenix has been such a huge part of my life for the past few years that it feels kind of strange not to have it as a focus anymore. I love it and I'm glad that it exists in the world, and I'm looking forward to flying it and out in public and showing other people, but it's kind of strange not to have such a massive project taking up such a lot of brain space. So I'm looking forward to the next one. I'm not sure what it'll be yet, but I've learned a lot from making this, and I want to take those things that I've learned into the next project, whatever that's going to be. And thanks for watching.